Welcome to PEP Talk, the Prevention Education Podcast. This podcast was created in hopes of furthering the general public's understanding of prevention education work, especially in the sexual violence field. Each episode will cover a topic that increases listeners' knowledge of this important work, with our ultimate goal being to one day live in a society where being informed on sexual violence is the norm, and every community feels empowered to be a part of the solution to end it. My name is Megan Morrow, and I'm here today with my co-host,
Bryan Pryor.
We are both prevention education specialists at the Crime Victims Center of Erie County, which you will hear us refer to as CVC, located near downtown Erie, Pennsylvania. If you're sitting there thinking, what is a prevention education specialist? That's actually our topic for today. I started doing this work in August of 2017. Since I first told people that I was taking the job, the question I get asked most often is, so what do you do? Or what does that actually entail? Something like that. Bryan, have you also experienced that?
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of questions about like what exactly is prevention education and what we do and what we present about, which is what we'll be talking about today. But we also get a lot of questions about like what the Crime Victims Center itself does. And so I think knowing what a prevention education specialist is also explains exactly what our organization does too.
Absolutely. Now, to be fair, prior to coming to work for the CVC, I hadn't heard of a prevention education specialist either. So if you are not aware of that, you are not alone. So we thought it would be helpful to take the time to explain what our job title really means and what the work we do looks like off paper. Broadly speaking, our role as members of the prevention education team is to raise awareness and educate our community in an effort to reduce and ideally prevent crime and victimization. However, Bryan and I approach our work from different perspectives, and we have different academic backgrounds as well. So we're each going to tell you a bit about ourselves and how that influences the work that we do. So I'll start. My educational background is psychology. I graduated from Penn State Behrend in the spring of 2014 with my bachelor's degree. I chose psych as my major because I have an enduring captivation with and a desire to understand human behavior and an equally passionate desire to help others. After a couple full-time jobs that weren't a good fit, I accepted my position at the CVC. Although I was really excited, if I'm being 100% honest, I wasn't confident that I would be good at this job. See, I was told a large portion of my time would be spent speaking in front of groups of students and adults about topics like child sexual abuse, consent, and sexual assault. Even for people who are comfortable with public speaking, which I was not, these are topics that as a society, we often avoid talking about because they make us feel awkward or uncomfortable. I was really stepping out of my comfort zone taking on this role. But despite all of that self-doubt and the worries that I had, it turns out my desire to help others is stronger than my fear of talking in front of people. And now I love getting to go into places and talk about these topics. I've gotten feedback that I do pretty well. What I enjoy the most is presenting on consent. For the record, consent applies to much more than just sex, and therefore as a concept really needs to be introduced early, like kindergarten age. I was 25 before I had a true understanding of consent in a sexual context, and that is just unacceptable. And that came from having abstinence-only sex education and no discussion of consent in other contexts until I got to college. I think that's why I enjoy going and talk about it so much, because I know it's not being talked about and it really needs to be. So that's a little about me. Now I'm going to hand the mic over to Bryan so he can tell you more about him.
As Megan mentioned, we do come from different backgrounds, and my background, I started, I think, on presenting and sort of education at a little bit earlier stage. I went to St. Bonaventure. I graduated from St. Bonaventure University in 2000 with my bachelor's in philosophy/pre-law. I went to Pitt Law School, graduated from law school in 2003. And then from 2004 on, I've been an adjunct philosophy professor at Gannon University. And being a professor and already teaching before I came to CVC, I think I had a little more experience and a little more comfort level in presenting to groups. But what teaching about philosophy gave me the ability to do is kind of approach things from the why. Philosophy is really not just about understanding like knowledge and what we know, but also like why things are the way they are, why we think the way we do, or why we argue or discuss things the way we do. And a big part of prevention education is not just being aware of what is happening, but why is it happening? Because you need to know why something is happening in order to be able to prevent it. And so I think for me, while I maybe felt a little more comfortable in talking about things publicly and just being, you know, a public speaker, the first sort of hurdle I had was really recognizing and being aware of what the difference between prevention and awareness is. Talking about a subject may not necessarily prevent it from happening. You might make people aware of the problem, but are you really understanding why it's happening and therefore how to prevent it? So that's what I really liked getting into and really approaching as far as the idea of prevention goes. And for me, I think just like Megan, you know, you talk about consent being a really big idea and a very important key topic that you like discussing and getting into. I feel like talking about bystander intervention and then just the approach I came from, which is, I don't necessarily say it would be unique, but it's the condition of being, you know, identifying as male and male gender. People have different expectations of how I'm going to talk about subjects and how I'm going to bring things up. And it's not bad or good, it's just different. And because of that, I feel that when we're talking about things like prevention, especially things like sexual assault and sexual awareness, understanding the why from a male perspective and how we can help prevent issues from the male side of things is something I really try to bring to the table and try to make people aware of when I do my presentations, even in young, you know, educational situations like your elementary schools and middle schools. But that's me.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. So we essentially started at the same time, and our supervisor made a very intentional point to have both males and females on the team. So that's a really good point that you mentioned that, because yeah, the gender that you identify with and kind of the way you see the world is going to be affected by that, especially when we're talking about things like sexual violence. So that's a really good point.
And that's why, like, when we talk about things again like prevention, it's both. You can't really go into a situation and say, all right, well, we're only going to deal with awareness or we're only going to deal about prevention. You got to deal with both of them. And I just know in times when I've done presentations, especially when you start getting to middle school and high school age, it's not uncommon to find young boys and girls, in particular young boys, who have heard the term like toxic masculinity. And one of the first things you got to do for prevention and awareness is make sure they understand truly what you mean. Like you said about consent, you know, people hear consent and they immediately think, oh, you're talking about sex. No, it goes far beyond that. Well, toxic masculinity doesn't mean it's toxic to be masculine or a man. It just means there's certain aspects of it that might be bad. So a lot of what we do is just making sure that we're all on the same page and we understand the basic definitions of what we're talking about. Because if you don't have that groundwork down, then you're not going to get any prevention or any awareness going.
Yeah, definitely being on the same page is super important. I mean, with any topic, but especially when you're talking about things that are sensitive, that are uncomfortable, that people sometimes avoid talking about for those reasons, being on the same page is so critical to having it feel like a discussion and not a lecture. So we both have presented on a wide variety of topics related to crime and victimization. Our audiences include students, pre-K through college age, parents, community members, and working professionals. Especially if you grew up in Erie, Good Touch, Bad Touch, or Good Secrets, Bad Secrets probably rings a bell with you. Depending on what school you went to, it might be a little bit more vivid of a memory if you had it every single year. That is one of our most requested topics for the preschool and elementary age kids. But other topics considered part of what we refer to as our standard programming for the schools include internet and social media safety, typically in 6th grade, sexual harassment, typically in 7th grade, and then sexting awareness, typically in 8th grade. All presentations are individualized for the age of the students we're presenting to, and they can be customized further when requested. So some schools prefer kind of a more overview approach. Sometimes they might be experiencing things within the school where they want us to get a little more in depth. So we're able to customize, which is really great.
And if we already kind of have an inroad with the school, or if we, have been presenting on a fairly regular basis, year after year, to schools, it's not uncommon for them to just get a hold of us and tell us specifically what they want us to present to. I remember the first time I ever did a presentation on human trafficking, it was because a school specifically requested. That's what they wanted to talk about, which, coming from teaching in a college situation where you have your curriculum, you have your syllabus, you have some freedom on what you're going to talk about, but you have a general idea. Here's what we're going to do this year. Here's the textbooks we're going to use and everything. To be in a situation where they basically say, okay, this is the topic we heard about. You tell us what you know. That's like the dreaded freedom. Like, okay, well, we need a little more guidance, but it's nice to have that freedom to be able to come into the school and know that you're going to be able to talk about what you feel is important and relevant, as well as what they feel needs to be addressed too. So.
And sometimes that is really intimidating to have that completely open freedom of, hey, you're the expert, come tell us what we need to know. Especially, and I think I can speak for Bryan on this, when we were newer to this, that was even more so of like, hey, Amy, which is our supervisor, how do we approach this? But we've kind of become more veteran at this. So when we get that freedom, at least in my opinion, I actually kind of like it now.
I've gotten used to it. When it first comes up, people, I know some of my friends and some of my colleagues and stuff I've talked to, it's like, oh, that's so amazing. I would kill anything for that freedom. I'm like, yeah, I guess when you get used to it. But at the first time, it's sort of like, I don't know, if you have family or friends, or if you have roommates or whatever, and it's like, well, you want to get some dinner? Okay, yeah, I want to eat. Well, what do you want to eat? I don't care, whatever. Okay, well, do you want a pizza? Sure. Well, what do you want in a pizza? I don't care, whatever. And just that general little angst and that frustration will multiply it by an entire classroom. And what you're trying to do is both prevent and make people aware of a situation. And sometimes that freedom can be daunting.
And sometimes you just never know what you're walking into. I mean, I've had classes where you could hear a pin drop the whole time that I'm talking. I've had classes where I'm constantly having to kind of wait for the teacher to cue them in that, hey, this is a time for us to listen, not really a time for us to talk. Not that talking isn't encouraged in certain times in the presentations, but you can just kind of tell some audiences, they feel like they already know everything when we get in there. And so trying to get over that initial hurdle sometimes is a little bit challenging. And again, that comes with experience. I've gotten more comfortable at what I refer to as like my teacher voice, where I can kind of corral the students a little better, versus when I was first starting out, I was really intimidated if they were trying to talk over me. I don't know if.
Yeah, you get it. It's a situation where I don't know that you necessarily, if we'll ever be at a point where we're prepared for everything. Because as soon as you think you got to figure it out, something will happen. And we've only, we're experienced, but still, it's only been 3 years or so. So, and now that we have sort of the new normal, the dynamic of classrooms and stuff will probably change, and with that will bring different, ways to interact. But you kind of get used to learning real quick that, like, okay, if this one particular boy or girl has their hand up after every single sentence you say, maybe you just pretend you don't see the hand up and just let other people talk, or you find your polite little ways of take cues and everything. And that doesn't change. That's, I know that sounds elementary school, but you'll have it in middle school, even high school and everything like that. The only difference is sometimes maybe they don't put their hand up before they start talking. You just kind of have to go with the flow on that. But yeah, every situation is different. And sometimes you're just sitting there literally going through what you planned on saying and you're getting nothing back. Other times you look at the clock and you go, okay, well, maybe we're only going to get through half of what I wanted to. Hopefully they'll have us back and we can do this again. So.
Yeah, I've definitely had the sort of ending scramble where I realize I have a chunk of the presentation still to go, and I'm getting like the 10-minute warning or whatever for class ending. Again, that comes with experience, being able to balance the time and know when you're running behind because students are asking questions or, you know, talking or whatever they're doing. But yeah, I mean, the more we do it, the more we are comfortable doing it. And especially with, like I said, our standard programming, you really do get that to a point where it's almost on the dot of when you finish it because it is essentially the same presentation, which is a good thing. I mean, I feel like once you have the time allotment really figured out and really are comfortable with that, then you can really focus on the delivery of the content, which is just as important as making sure you get it all out. So presentations are a lot of what we do, which are mainly us kind of talking at them, although we do try to have interactive components to it because especially with children and adolescents versus adults, the longer you're talking at them, the less they're listening towards the end. So we do try to make it a bit interactive. And then there are other types of things that we do as far as presenting to audiences where sometimes we take on more of a discussion facilitator role, like with our Parents in the Know, a child sexual abuse prevention training. Awareness and skill building are important elements to preventing this type of victimization, so child sexual abuse, because more often than not, the abuser is somebody that the child knows. And I'll give you a second to kind of like digest that, because if you haven't really thought about that before, if you're not really aware of it, that fact can kind of give you that, I don't know, visceral reaction or that kind of just angst reaction. But over and over again, that's what research has shown. I'm a big fan of Parents in the Know because I think that parents, and really just most adults in general, are in need of a space to ask questions like, how do I talk to my kid or a kid that I care about sexual abuse and healthy versus unhealthy boundaries? And sometimes just starting that conversation, knowing how to start that conversation is a big hurdle that parents and caregivers and concerned adults just, they don't know how to get over it, so they kind of avoid it. Parents in the Know, you actually learn, especially those two things specifically, how to have those kinds of conversations. Just as a little sidebar, if you would like to know any additional information about any of the programs we've mentioned so far, please check out our website, cvcerie.org, so cvcerie.org, or you can give us a call at 814-455-9414 and just ask for somebody from the Prevention Education Department. Networking is another essential component to doing our job. That includes both locally and nationally. I feel very fortunate that I've got to attend 2 national conferences last year, NSEC, which is the National Sex Education Conference held in New Jersey, and NSAC, or the National Sexual Assault Conference, which is held in Philadelphia. And then every other year it's held on the West Coast. Bryan, what has your conference experience been?
Well, I think first starting out, Amy made it a point that we got a lot of the same sort of general conferences and trainings under our belt. The most recent conference that I went to is I did a conference in Washington, D.C., a 3-day training. Really, it was more of a training than a conference for healthy masculinity, as I mentioned before, from the organization Men Can Stop Rape. And I found that really, we do a lot of, again, kind of getting to the idea of when we teach and when we present, every situation is different. So you got to learn to basically be trained to be constantly training. And so a lot of conferences and trainings and everything like that are very crucial at. But that was the most recent one that I went to.
Yeah, learning is an ongoing process when you have a job like ours. So for sure, we are encouraged to seek out these things. And actually, it's really great to be encouraged to do that because, I don't know, maybe this makes me sound like a nerd, but I like learning. So really getting the freedom and the space to be able to do that on an ongoing basis, I enjoy. Going to conferences, making professional connections, is how we stay informed on the best programs and content delivery methods that are out there. Locally, Bryan and I both are also regular attendees of the Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition, which is held at Mercyhurst University. Typically, it's been held every couple of months. Things have changed up a little bit now. And then there's other local task force and things that between the two of us, we attend and are a part of. So really just trying to establish and then maintain those community connections, national connections, and have that good network of people who are educated and passionate about what we do and informed on what we do that can help us in an everyday kind of way to continue on what we do when we're not physically there to do it. So prevention education specialist is our official title. And depending on, the people in your personal life or that you've interacted with professionally, you might have heard like some similar sounding titles before. So preventionist or prevention educator or community educator. Really, these titles typically tend to all mean about the same thing. No matter what the exact title is, the central focus is nearly identical, and that is to reduce and prevent victimization. So if you have heard one of those before, or if you hear one of those titles in the future, hopefully now you'll be able to kind of have that memory hook of, oh, okay, so essentially it means this. If you have a child in any school district in Erie County where the programs that we were talking about today aren't being provided and you want them to be, we encourage you to let the school district and the officials know. The easiest way for us to be invited into a school is parents advocating for the importance of education on these topics. And that's a question we get asked a lot when we do interact with parents is, hey, I think these are great. How do I get this in front of my kid? If you're unsure how to go about doing this, how to approach school officials or how to, kind of get their attention, feel free to give us a call. We can give you some tips and ideas. Right now, things are a little uncertain with COVID-19, but we do have the ability to present on topics virtually. So certainly, if this is something that you do feel should be happening right now, and hopefully after this, at least a few of you think that, feel free to reach out to us and we can give you some tips and some advice on that.
Yeah, and just going off of that, one of the other things that has come about from us being prevention education specialists and getting through trainings and seminars and things through different organizations, and we sort of, one of the main ones we deal with is obviously, I call it like our sister organization is PEP, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, and they're responsible for a lot of our trainings and a lot of what we went through as prevention education specialists. One of the things we have the ability to do is provide mandate reporting training for child sexual abuse. So almost all of the roles and professions, jobs that a person may have working in the school or around children, the state of Pennsylvania makes you a mandate reporter of child abuse. And you're required to go through, training, certification, recertification for that. And a lot of areas needed to do recertification this year and ran into a roadblock because, things shut down right around February and March. And so I did a couple mandate reportings through Zoom, through Teams. The one advantage of technology and these outlets and these apps is that anything we would do in a classroom, we can find a way to adapt and make it work virtually as well. So we know schools and organizations are going to be kind of, as the year winds up, we're going to be trying to figure out how to adjust and deal with what they have to deal with. But we just want to let everybody know that we're still here and we can find a way to make it work for you too.
Absolutely. And again, if you weren't really familiar with what it is that we do prior to today, hopefully now you have that better understanding. And as parents, as caregivers, as concerned community members, see the value in the things that we have to offer. Specialist is in our title, and we are specialists in talking about these things, but really we're also just two concerned members of the community who feel that we have this special ability to put this information out there and teach others how they can facilitate having these kinds of discussions and having these kind of open spaces to talk about things that are kind of awkward and uncomfortable, fair, but are really important. And you don't want to always do things retroactively. You don't always want to wait until there's a big issue or a big problem and then try to fix it. The whole thing with prevention is it's trying to prevent victimization in the first place. So by having conversations, by having open dialogue and establishing that early, by just knowing how to approach some of these topics in a way that doesn't make especially kids kind of shy away and not want to talk about it is super important. So really that's what our role is, and why that educator piece is part of our title as well. We want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. Our next episode will be talking about the newly released documentary Athlete A, which is about the USA Gymnastics sexual abuse perpetrated by Larry Nassar. So just to kind of give you a little preview there. Again, thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again. We want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to our podcast. If you like what you heard, please share us with your social circle. Our next episode will be discussing the newly released documentary Athlete A, which is about former Dr. Larry Nassar and his horrific sexual abuse of hundreds of young girls that shook the country in 2016. You can watch this documentary on Netflix. We hope to have you back with us again. Take care.